Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Greg Austin. I'm a Vice President of the East-West Institute. Thank you very much for coming all this way to the second Worldwide Cybersecurity Summit. This brief session of 15 minutes is to give you an introduction to the work of the breakthrough groups that we set up from the Dallas Summit last year, and to give you some introduction to the way we'll be continuing the breakthrough group process this afternoon and tomorrow morning. My very brief role here in this 15-minute session is to introduce my good friend and colleague Karl Rauscher, a distinguished engineer, a distinguished fellow of the East-West Institute, and our Chief Technology Officer. Karl is the principal moving force behind the US-China spam report, building on the good groundwork laid by our President and CEO John Morose and the China team in the East-West Institute. So I think the Ambassador's praise of the report is very well grounded. Karl is an engineer of great repute in the United States. He left Bell Labs to come to the East-West Institute so he could have just that influence on policy that we've seen in his, or in the team's report on US-China fighting spam. And just one word on that report: it was put together by a team of about 20 experts and technical people and corporate people from both China and the United States. They reached agreement on 2 recommendations, and I think it's about 20 or 30 46 best practices in fighting spam. So without further ado, I'll introduce Karl to take you through the breakthrough group process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those kind words, Greg. And now we are transitioning from the plenary portion of the program to the working part of the program. So it's time to be prepared to roll up your sleeves, to fasten your seatbelts, or saddle up your horses, however you want to put it. And I'm going to quickly take you through what's happened in the last year so you have some context about the options that you could participate in this afternoon and tomorrow morning. Let's see. So I'm going to tell you briefly how we prioritize the topics that we're focusing on, describe briefly what a breakthrough group is, talk about the breakthrough group progress for the last year, and then tell you about where we're going to go from here. So there's a lot of subject matter that's included in the topic of cybersecurity. Everything from the far end of cyber warfare and conflict to more perhaps gentle topics of protecting youth and everything in between, such as protecting our critical infrastructure. So how do we deal with which topics we focus on? Well, if you think of cyberspace as being made up of 8 ingredients, here's what the ingredients would be. You don't need a 9th, and with only 7, you wouldn't really have cyberspace. The 8th ingredient, that last one, policy, is what the Institute focuses on. This is our niche, and particularly the international policy arena. It's necessary, just as necessary as the other ingredients, to have policy. It allows for the anticipation of entities, of the behavior of other entities, whether they be governments, corporations, individuals, or machines. They need to be able to anticipate the behavior of each other. And John showed earlier a chart that showed the relationship between ASPR, the longer name for policy agreements, standards, policies, and regulations. And he showed a contrast between how crime is further ahead than the ASPR pace, but this shows within the 8 ingredients how we had that same phenomena where that policy is behind where the technology is moving compared to each of the ingredients. And so what a breakthrough group is it's a situation where that progress that's being either stalled or non-existent for that ASPR is able to catch up and keep pace with the pace of the technology. So as I just mentioned, there's times where there's no policy effort even underway to try to solve a problem, or it's stalled for some reason. So here are the criteria that we use coming out of Dallas. Is it international in scope? Is it the focus on ASPR as opposed to technology or just business? Is it stalled or non-existent? What is the impact? Would it be significant? And is the posture and anticipation proactive, and we're not walking into a crowded room where there's already a lot of people making progress in the area? We're very happy to applaud and encourage others who are doing that. And is the technological solutions there, and is the feasibility there for business? And so we have an analysis done across these criteria. And coming out of Dallas, we had 25 topics that were discussed. And the leadership of the Institute suggested, we need to pick 2 or 3 to champion. When we did the analysis, it just didn't come out that way. There were really 5 that were distinguished, that had very high marks. And so we ended up going with these 5 here. International priority communications policy. That's recognizing that there is an increasing likelihood of congestion because of the non-deterministic, intense bandwidth applications that we're using now. The next one deals with cyber conflict rules of the road. You heard a lot about that this morning. Measuring the cybersecurity problem. This was a new one that came out of, there was no expectation of this in Dallas. It came out of one of the breakthrough groups by several people as an idea. And then the next one is one you hear often about, the integrity of supply chains. And the last one is an emergency response capability. And so we've had progress, as you see on the right side here. We actually have recommendations in 4 reports for the first 3 of these. 2 of these reports are out. 2 of these will be coming out very shortly. They'll be going through some additional rigorous review at this summit before their publication. And so we have specific recommendations for many of these. This is a key point about the progress since last year. Where do breakthrough groups come from? This is a kind of a complicated chart here, but we just talked about how the summit process exists. There's also the bilateral process. The SPAM report you just heard referenced from the ambassador is also a place where recommendations can come forth between 2 major cyber superpowers in the world, and then with the intention of immediately becoming multilateral, engaging the rest of the community, as will be done here with some of the work that was done between the U.S.-Russian bilateral and rendering the Geneva and Hague conventions into cyberspace, and the fighting spam work, and as well as some terminology work on cyber conflict. Another area is special organizations, the IEEE partnership we've got. There's a new one that Greg has formed with IBSIG here, a group of experts in the financial community, and there's others. And so there's a number of places these could come forth, and you'll see that we have a number of areas where progress has taken place. As an engineer, I'm tempted to throw out a lot of number on the statistics to talk about all the work that took place. Many of you in the room have been incredible contributors to this process, and we really appreciate that. We could talk about the hundreds of people involved, the many, many meetings, the hours, the late phone calls in different time zones, etc. But the most important statistics here are we're having impact. This is a chart that shows your typical S-curve relationship between time and investment versus the value coming out of this. And we basically have 3 phases with these breakthrough groups. There's a time of brainstorming and development, and then there's a time of implementing the recommendation, and then there's a time of having these recommendations championed and institutionalized by an existing appropriate entity. And in Dallas last year, we had the ROGUCCI study just come out on making the undersea cable infrastructure more resilient. And so we had 12 recommendations in the yellow area, and that was it. A year later, we now have 25 recommendations. We have 11 recommendations in the implementation phase. We're actually working on implementing those with government or in business in the private sector as makes sense. And we actually have 6 recommendations that are being championed by an organization being institutionalized. The International Cable Protection Committee has adjusted their charter and moved forward in implementing ROGUCCI recommendations. We have the Message Anti-Abuse Working Group, which is very well represented this week by the leadership to take on the spam recommendations. We have a paper written by Telcordi, an excellent one on some other recommendations. So we have a number of recommendations being implemented, and this is the encouraging, most encouraging number here I could show you about our progress. I show the green and the blue squares here mixed a bit because there is a transition as we're handing that baton off to these organizations. So where do we go from here? These recommendations are following a format where they're very clear and actionable in a 2 to 4 page format that an executive, CEO, or senior cabinet member in government could read, where we concisely state the background of the recommendation and what it is, that the recommendation consists of. You'll see this in all the reports that are outside. And then we identify what the required commitments are from government and the private sector, what the alternatives are. And I'm circling the one area about suggested next steps, because a number of the groups that are implementing recommendations will be focusing on taking those next steps in this summit. For the other groups that are less mature along that S-curve, they'll be in the brainstorming mode. And each of you have a 2-sided piece of paper like this in your registration materials. One side is blank, the other side has examples like I'm showing here that you'll be using in your breakthrough group to talk about what the problem is, to make sure you're agreeing on the same problem as you're trying to solve it, and you'll be iteratively working on what recommendations can be, required commits, et cetera, like we worked through before. So this is one possible template you could use. You're not forced to use it in your breakthrough groups, but that's one option for you. So where do we go from here? We go directly from here to lunch, but after that you'll have 2 opportunities this afternoon in the working program to participate in one of these breakthrough groups. In Dallas, we had the same theme run through 3 different slots. And in London here, there's only one group that's meeting 3 times. Most groups are meeting once or twice. So you have the opportunity to be exposed to different subject matter today and tomorrow morning. So you can see the time frames here. You can look for page 10 to see which choice you want to make. There's 8 of them for the first slot after lunch. Then there's a break, more poster session time, and then after that there's 7 choices you can make in the second slot. Tomorrow morning, you're all invited to a breakfast, a brainstorming breakfast time. Secretary Chertoff, the chief scientist of the Carnegie Mellon, Greg Shannon, will be joining us. Also Wayne Pacine from the Federal Reserve to talk about would there be value in an international cyber exercise where we look at some common failure modes and how we would address those from a communication standpoint. Then we have slot 3 from 8:30 to 10. You have 7 choices there, and then there'll be a readout tomorrow around this time, late in the morning, of the breakthrough group activity. And then we are committing to have an interim report out in a 30-day time frame for you to get a summary of all the breakthrough group activity that takes place here. I want to thank everyone who's come here as a subject matter expert to give your thoughts. Encourage you to rigorously give input in this process. Thank you to the chief editors who will be capturing the key points, the champions and the chairs for the service you'll be doing over the next 2 days. And that's the conclusion of my remarks. And again, roll up your sleeves, saddle up your horses, and we have a busy time ahead of us this afternoon. And thank you again in advance for your participation.